I'm very proud to present to you our budget frontier, where we are going to dive deep into the fiscal package for 2024 and of course, the budget statement presented by the Minister of Finance.
Hi everyone, I am Shanta Sipasad and we're joined by a dynamic trio of experts who will help us navigate this intricate financial landscape. But before we introduce them, let's set the stage for tonight's discussion.
Hello everyone, my name is Narmada Ramjit Singh. That's right, Shanta. In the upcoming fiscal year, Trinidad and Tobago has experienced a budget deficit. What does that mean for our economy, and what does it mean for our growth and development as a nation? Tonight, we aim to answer all of these questions.
Without any further ado, let's meet our panel of experts.
Joining us tonight is economist and lecturer Dr. Valmiki Arjun. Welcome, Dr. Arjun.
Thank you very much for having me. Good day to all your viewers out there.
We are also honored to have with us the MP for Mayaro, the Honorable MP Rushton Parry, who shadows the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Welcome, MP.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much for having me as well.
Last but not least, we have Dr. Faith B. Israel, THA Secretary of Division of Health, Wellness and Social Protection. Welcome, Dr. B. Israel.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor being here.
Now, let's get straight into this discussion because the Minister of Finance presented a budget and we're going to try to capture at least the entire thing in this 1 hour. Dr. Arjun, let's start with the total revenue for the upcoming fiscal year is projected at around 54 billion, while the expenditure is estimated at 59 billion. So we're facing a deficit. Could you please provide insights into the potential economic implications? And it seems as though we are getting accustomed in Trinidad and Tobago to deficit budgets. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, the bulk of our budgets have been deficits. In fact, before the previous fiscal year, 2 fiscal years ago, 2021 to 2022, remember that was a fiscal surplus. We had about $1.33 billion in surplus. At that stage, we would have actually spent 1.33 billion less than what we earned in revenues. So that allowed for some excess amounts of about 1.33 billion. However, let's look at the bigger picture here. In the last 6 years, the overall fiscal deficit would have been in the vicinity of $48 billion. So what that means is that we spent $48 billion more than what we actually earned in revenues. So think about it from this perspective. If you are spending more than what you are earning, what do you have to do to make up for that shortfall, that gap? You obviously have to borrow, which is what they would have done, which is what governments tend to do all the time when there are deficits. Deficits push up your national debt burden. So as a result of this, back in 2021, we would have seen our debt to GDP ratio cross 80%. Now, the debt to GDP has actually gone back down earlier this year. It was in the vicinity of 65 to 66%. We've been recently told by the finance minister that it's somewhere in the vicinity of slightly under 70%. And I think that is why we have now an additional fiscal deficit for this year. So he is projecting that they're going to spend about $5.1 billion more than what they're earning in revenues. But I'm not surprised by this. Reason being is that this is his possibly second to last budget before a general election. So obviously they want to spend more. And we've seen that he's budgeting even more for capital expenditure, which is he's spending on infrastructural works. The tangible things then that a country could see. Buildings going up here, bridges going up elsewhere, roads being fixed all across the country. These things politicians tend to perceive. I'm not trying to offend anybody here. I know we have 2 other politicians on the panel, right? But in general, there's a misconception that the more infrastructural works you do, it helps you to win elections. So because the debt burden has reduced somewhat because of the high oil and gas revenues we would have seen in the last 2 fiscal years, that has now given him the fiscal space, the room then to engage in a bigger fiscal deficit this year so he could afford to spend more money, especially on existing and new infrastructural works, because elections is basically almost 2 years away.
Right. MP Parry, we heard the Minister of Finance give the budget speech, and this year's theme is building capacity for diversification and growth within a world of challenges. The Minister also highlighted low unemployment rates, thriving business, and economic growth. What are your initial reactions and thoughts regarding these statements and the overall direction of the budget?
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't know what country Minister Imbert was speaking of. He said that we are living in a country with low unemployment figures. I think the Central Statistical Office gave us somewhere about 3.7%. I don't know where that figure came from, how it came from. It is not reflective in the constituency that I represent. Unemployment is a big issue for me in terms of the constituency. And then looking at the theme of the minister's budget this year, I think it's a little too late. You tell me in his 9th budget, he has now decided to put diversification and strategies for that now. I recall the Prime Minister had one of his fits when he does his puppeteering and saying that the country keeps talking diversification. Look, go drink all the rum wherever I go and drink it. Now, when the minister comes in his 9th budget and talk that, then I have cause for concern. When you look at the overall economic climate in this country, and I know Dr. Arjun would know the numbers a lot better than I would, but as representatives of the people, as parliamentarians, our job really is to break down the impact of government policy and how it affects the ordinary citizen. So when we talk GDP and we talk unemployment figures and we talk Standards and Poor's and we talk Moody's, what does that mean to the man on the ground? And I can tell you it means very little to the man on the ground. And I can tell you that over the last 9 years, we have converted our communities into market stalls. You drive through rural Trinidad and Tobago today, you could have a matchbox house or you could have a mansion. In front of that house, there's a stall that is selling some sort of produce. That tells a story. When you drive through some communities, you have these Venezuelan folks with their children standing on the side of the road with signs, asking for food, asking for help. Now, at the end of the day, one can be xenophobic and say, well, why did they come here? They come here to see more trouble than they were seeing in Venezuela. But the point is, they are here to stay. And we as a state, as a government, has made a mess out of that migration policy. We have not been able to utilize the strength of 100,000 Venezuelans in here, their art, their music, their culture, to fuse with what we're doing in the community to drive revenue in our communities. So the question that you ask is, about, where was the mindset? I think all the minister did for 4 hours and 25 minutes, he gave an update on a lot of running projects that were earmarked since 2021. 80% of what he spoke about was updates. It was more of the same things that we've been hearing over and over and over for the last 4 years. As a citizen of this country, as a parliamentarian, as a member of parliament, taking into consideration the challenges that we face as a country in terms of how are we going to fare in a global community, one would have thought 2 years before an election, there would have been some shift in thinking by the administration. What was new? There was nothing new. There was nothing innovative. I mean, I am glad. I am happy for the $1 billion back pay that citizens are going to receive. I think money into the economy is good. It is great for rural communities like mine. It keeps the microeconomy going. I will not say that the grants for schools and so on is bad, because we need the help. I mean, I just this school term alone, I had over 150 families turn up over the 2-month period asking for help with school shoes, book bags, and we do quite a bit of sifting out those who really need the help from those who just, playing the fool at the end of the day, and because they hear their neighbor get something, they turn up by the MP's office. So I saw nothing innovative in terms of crime and the economy, and I know we'll talk a bit about that later. Those two things, to me, was supposed to be the foundation of the presentation, the policy, or the direction of the government over the next 24 months as they take us into 2025. He spent 7 minutes after 4 hours and 12 minutes to talk about crime and what they're going to do about crime in this country. So overall, I was not impressed. I don't think the country was impressed. I think many of the newspaper editorials agreed with that position, that there was nothing new, there was nothing innovative, nothing to look forward to outside of the possibility of an election next year. And I think that is what they're aiming for.
Thank you, MP Pare. Dr. B. Israel, post-budget, you gave an insightful interview where you made reference to the Dispute Resolution Committee agreement, what was agreed upon in Parliament in 2001. This agreement proposed that Tobago is to be allocated 6.9% of the national budget, which is to total about $4.54 billion for fiscal 24. However, only 4.36% of the national budget, totaling $2.58 billion, was allocated. What are your overall impression of the budget allocation for THA, given that recurrent expenditure of $2.298 billion leaves you all with only $260 million for developmental programs?
Thank you, and that's a wonderful question. One correction, the Dispute Resolution Commission basically said that the government of Trinidad and Tobago is to allocate to the Tobago House of Assembly between 4.03 and 6.9% of the national budget. And what we were highlighting was the fact that for the 20 odd years since this ruling has been in place, we've really only gotten closer to the lower mark, closer to the 4.03, in this case 4.36% of the national budget. The minister and the chief secretary, who happens to be the secretary with responsibility for finance, met earlier a couple weeks ago, and they decided, or they had the conversation, that since we have been getting the bottom end of the stick for such a long time, over 2 decades, it would really be nice to finally put Tobago at the middle point. So we weren't even saying let's get the full 6.9%. Let's go something at a 5.5%. And why is this important? It's important because the fact remains that Trinidad and Tobago, it is Trinidad and Tobago. These are two distinct islands that need to be developed equitably. What we've been experiencing is the island known as Trinidad getting a Herculean share of the national budget every single year. Now, if we were a single island and we looked at the population size of Tobago, we would think, okay, so maybe that's not too much of an issue. The population size of Tobago is only 60,000, which is usually the argument. But the fact remains that we really do have two separate islands that is separated by water, which means that those of us on the island of Tobago do not have access very easily to the kind of development that happens on the island in Trinidad. So what does that mean? It means that if we really need to get medical care, that requires us to get on a plane or on a boat to get to Trinidad. If we really need to get educational services, it requires the same thing. Basic things that we have recently gotten to the point where we do not have to go to Trinidad, for example, to get our birth papers and our passports and that kind of thing. You know, I hear people comparing us to some of the rural communities. But the fact is, even with the most rural community in Trinidad, you can still literally get in a taxi or a bus or a car, drive to Port of Spain, and within a couple hours be back home. That is simply not an option for those of us who are in Tobago, because you literally need to figure out how to get off of the island, which in and of itself is an issue with Caribbean Airlines and Port Authority, and spend the day in Trinidad, lose an entire day of work, figure out if you can get back to Tobago. If you can't get back to Tobago, it means there's an additional cost of overnighting, what happens with your children who you've left home, and all of these things. So our argument has been Trinidad and Tobago are two islands that are supposed to be equal entities within the state known as Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, we need to spend a little bit more time and a little bit more effort and a little bit more of the resources of the government of Trinidad and Tobago focusing on what we need to do on the island of Tobago. Now, you highlighted the fact that a big chunk of the 2 point whatever billion dollars that we are going to get is going towards recurrent expenditure. What is that? Basic salaries, paying light bills, the basic things that we need to do to survive. The critical part, though, is the fact that we are only getting $260 million for development expenditure. And that is what we are supposed to take for the entire year to develop all of the industries, all of the schools and the hospitals and the roads and the everything that we need to develop in Tobago. We are expected to do that with $2.6 million. And let me put that into perspective. There were 3 projects that were identified. Imagine the expansion of the San Fernando Hospital car park. San Fernando Hospital car park. $150 million for that expansion. Yet you are telling the whole island of Tobago that we have to do everything that we have to do with $260 million. Hazley Crawford Stadium, which was refurbished for the games recently, $90 million in the refurbishment of Hazley Crawford Stadium. But again, you're telling us we have to develop everything in Tobago for $260 million. And the maths in that, it's not adding up. And because we have spent so much time as a country, Trinidad and Tobago, throwing resources, much valued resources, into the development of the island known as Trinidad, what we are asking for is simply an opportunity to develop the island known as Tobago so that we really are able to move side by side as our anthem indicates.
Dr. B. Israel, do you think that because Dr. Arjun he put something very important into this discussion here, and he mentioned the word election is soon, right? I believe many economists, even independent economists, they as well, I believe Dr. Sajuan, she indicated on an earlier program that it's $5 billion for social grants, and that's the first time we see something like that. Do you think that the PNM government is trying to use the budget to victimize a non-PNM and THA administration? Do you think that would be a correct statement?
Well, I don't know that I would need to state whether it's correct or not. The Prime Minister, in his own words, told the people of Tobago that he will not forgive us if we vote for what was then PDP. He said it. These are not my words, these are his words. So it is quite clear that there is some level of I don't know if I want to use victimization or straight up we do not care about what is happening in Tobago, and that is being reflected in the budget. I must quickly highlight though that traditionally the two, if we are talking about elections, the 2 Tobago seats, as in the general election, Tobago East and West, are critical seats for whomever wants to wants to become the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So I don't know that it is wise for the Prime Minister and his administration to continue to victimize the people of Tobago, considering that these two seats may really be the two seats that determine whether his administration remains in the government after the next election or not. That is something that he and his party needs to critically think about.
Moving over to Dr. Arjun. The Minister of Finance allocated $250 million to the agriculture sector as a subsidy aimed at creating a tax-free environment. How do you see this allocation contributing to our long-term goal of food security and reducing our food import bill?
Okay, so first of all, this is the third consecutive budget, I believe, where an additional allocation was provided to the Ministry of Agriculture. Now, the question arises: has all, not just in the last year or in the coming year, but has all of them made any real difference? Now, the fact of the matter is that our food production levels in this country are nowhere near adequate to where they ought to be, which is why we have a $6 billion plus food bill pretty much every year, on average. We've seen in the pandemic what risks can accrue to countries when they rely on the rest of the world to feed them. But it seems that yet still we really haven't learned our lesson. I just want to give you some figures here. As an economist, I like to look at the numbers. And when I look at the Ministry of Trade's website, what they have, they survey supermarket prices from the different areas in the country. So I just picked one. I looked at the central region, which is where I'm from. And food inflation overall in the last 5 years in Trinidad and Tobago would have increased by 31%. So in the last 5 years, food prices went up by 31%. In the last year, according to the central bank's data, at this point, food inflation is just under 9%. Now let's break it down a bit. When you look at the data, between 2019 and September 2023, right? Between September 2019 and September 23, cheddar cheese, something as basic as cheddar cheese, the price of that went up by 26%. Margarine, one of the cheaper brands, Blue Band, the price of that went up by 67%. Eggs, a dozen eggs went up by 25.7%. Nestle liquid milk went up by 46%. Swiss macaroni went up by 45%. Flour, Ibis flour, 2 kg went up by 37%. Parboiled rice, Happy parboiled rice went up by 24%. Tuna flakes in water, a tin of tuna flakes went up by 10%. Vienna sausages went up by 6.2%. Corned beef, 41%. Red beans, 37%. A pack of Milo went up by 31.8%. A frozen chicken breast went up by 47%. And the list goes on and on. Now, what I find quite interesting is that food prices internationally, however, have started to fall. Given that we import the bulk of what we consume, it begs the question, why are the distributors that are importing food not reducing their prices that they charge to the supermarkets, etc., given that international shipping costs have normalized by now? Remember, last year at one point, the prices of shipping would have surged to well over 500% when you're importing from countries in China and that side of the world. Importing from Europe as well was also quite expensive. But prices have normalized. So why are we still charging very high prices, not just for food, but for most of the items that we're importing as well? That is a serious concern. Now, coming back to the issue of agriculture, we allocate these extra funds to the sector, but it begs the question, who's really benefiting from it when thousands of farmers still don't have land tenure? Think of land tenure in this manner. It's like an unregistered business. So if you don't have land tenure, you cannot go to the ministry to access the plethora of grants and incentives, tax breaks, access to machinery, access to training, and the list goes on and on. Because in all fairness to them, they do offer a wide range of financial assistance and services, training, etc. but you can't access even one of them if you don't have land tenure. And you've got thousands of farmers still in the country that have not got land tenure. So that's one element of it. And then you also have the infrastructural issues with respect to farmers. Many of them are still faced with serious flooding issues, irrigation issues, and then many of them, even though there have been instances in the national budget where they're allocating more funds towards pre-deer larceny. Pre-deer larceny is still a big issue in the farming community. And then one has to ask the question, what is our strategy with respect to boosting agriculture in the country? Strategies have been thought about. I mean, I remember in the past speaking about this as well, where you can make NAMDEVCO the NGC version of the agricultural sector as a way to incentivize farmers and bring on future farmers into the industry. And the way you do it is NAMDEVCO provides a guaranteed price to farmers for their produce. So that way, if you have a minimum price, you can set that price where the farmers are guaranteed to make a particular profit at the very least for the month or for the quarter, whatever the case may be. So NAMDEVCO gives them a guaranteed price and is guaranteeing them that they will take their produce from them, and then NAMDEVCO is the one that has to go out there and find the market. So they will sell it to the various markets, they would sell it to the various supermarkets and even export some of them. That way, because you are guaranteeing a price to the farmers, they are now incentivized by the understanding that their produce is going to be sold, is not going to be wasted, and they are going to access they're going to access more profits or more revenue at the end of the day. That's one strategy. Another strategy is the private sector taking it upon themselves and not waiting for help from the government. And that's where agricultural cooperatives can actually be handy. A cooperative is where, for example, a large business in a community gets together with the farmers within that community and they pool their resources together. So the large business provides them with some capital. The farmers have access to land, equipment, machinery, etc. And they all share in their resources to bump up production. And you could use that model across the entire country. So certain parts of the country will specialize in perhaps tomatoes. Certain parts of the country will specialize in ground provisions. Certain parts of the country will specialize in citrus. And you mass produce, you attain your economies of scale, lower cost of production. And that way you're not only able to feed your local market, but you're able to tap into the wider export market as well. But one of the things that we are really, really lagging behind on, the world is moving aggressively towards smart agricultural programs, utilizing technology within the agricultural sphere. So simple examples, what is being done in the UK and the Netherlands, etc. You could use drones to spray fertilizers, to apply nutrients to your crops on a daily basis. And you could sit in your bedroom or your living room with just your iPad or your phone and control the extent to which the drones is doing your work for you, right? In fact, one drone alone, I remember reading an article in Agriculture Journal recently, one drone alone in the UK can actually service over 20 football fields, farms that are the size of 20 football fields in less than one day. You can have sensors not in the soil as well that can tell you to what extent your crops need more irrigation, the soil needs more irrigation or less irrigation. Are you getting too much sunlight? Are you getting too much rain? What is the health of your crops right now? When is the ideal time to reap these crops and get it to the market? You can have smart bands that you can use for your livestock to assess the health of your livestock, when your cows are going to give milk, when they're going to give birth. And these are just basic, simple examples. The list goes on and on and on. In 2019, I visited China, and we left Beijing and went to a place called Ankang. Now, Ankang was typically known for a great deal of poverty, but the government, knowing that they have a serious food shortage in China, given their population size, they transformed Ankang to an agriculture hub. And guess what they're using in the agriculture program? Smart technology, to the extent where I don't know how this is being done, but they're using space technology as well to ramp up their food production per acreage so that the people don't have to necessarily rely on imported food. Now, I just want to touch on something on a different note, what MP Parry was speaking about, the issue of unemployment. I also have my reservations with that unemployment figure. And the reason being is that there's serious questions as to how accurately over time we measure or we gather data then for unemployment. According to the law, a business, if you retrench 4 or less people, you don't have to report it to the Ministry of Labor. So let's say you have 1,000 companies, and this certainly would have happened in the last.
I think we have
Yes.
lost Dr. Arjun for a few seconds. But while we are on that discussion about technology, MP Parry, you know, you are being touted as the Elon Musk of VRO, right? And technology is something that we're seeing quickly advancing with the introduction of AI and many different things. And of course, there's a Ministry of Digitization, I believe. The minister attempted to mention the ongoing improvements to the single electronic window. He spoke about the TT-Biz link, the launch of 14 new e-services in the fiscal year. Additionally, there's development, he said, for the port community system to enhance information exchange and reduce costs in logistics and trade processes. How do you envision these digitization efforts impacting businesses and trade in the region? Do you really think there's going to see something fruitful from Ministers Imbert's speech?
There has been some benefits over the years in terms of the digitization that has been ongoing. Since I was probably a child, I heard about the single electronic window. It's an ongoing process. But I have a position on these matters. No matter what law, what legislation, or what technology you throw at any problem, if the operators have issues, then there are challenges. Who are the operators in the trade space? Port Authority, Customs and Excise, shippers and handlers. When you ask businessmen, what are the challenges they find, especially exporters or even importers? Customs and Excise, over time, the length of time it takes you to get your appointments. I alone this week have been waiting on a container to be cleared for a client for 5 days. And every day, the container couldn't make the scanner. I have to pay a security company because I have to schedule them to watchman this container until we unstuff it. Every day, and 4 days, every day the container coming. And when they go to the scanner, there's a different problem. When you have issues with your paperwork sitting for 14 days at the brokers. Now, there's a number of issues that must be resolved with the operators of the system. And if we don't fix those issues, I can tell you, Customs and Excise, sometimes I feel they operate at their own whims and fancies. One customs officer will say that, this mouse is VAT free and duty free. But because it comes in a glass box, they want 40% duty and 15% VAT. So there's inconsistencies in those things, and that upsets businessmen. I had one complaint for Mother's Day this year, where one vendor had 6 containers of flowers a week and a half before Mother's Day. And the weekend for Mother's Day, he couldn't get the containers cleared. And there were a number of issues, but the biggest challenge for him, what he found out was that planned quarantine officers were not working that weekend because of some issue with payment on salaries and overtime and so on. Now, the containers were cleared the week after, and he had to dump probably half of the products. Now, SAW, digital transformation, legislation, incentives, that is fixing those problems. And unless we deal with the operators of the systems, we will not start to fix. And the minister talked about an improvement in manufacturing. And listen, all the kudos have to go to the manufacturers. There was no wisdom of this administration. There was no magic by the Minister of Finance that caused that. It was the sheer wit and ambition of our manufacturers that have had to sluggishly move forward. Thank God that there was some provision through the Exim Bank for foreign currency access and so on for them. So there was some improvement and some tangible improvement as well in terms of the manufacturing capacity. But when you talk to some of them, there are still some issues to be worked out. So to answer your question, if we get the IT systems right, the digitized systems correct, it will aid the process along. But the human part of the job, the human component, that is still lacking. And that is what we have to fix in this country going forward in any area.
Dr. Arjun, you were making a point on unemployment referencing MP Parry, but before you made that point, you gave us some percentages, and it's really a reality that we live in of the increased food prices, and we have not seen the Minister of Finance do anything for the poor and vulnerable in society with regards to food. Give us your take on that as well.
Yeah, so I was hoping that there would have been some sort of, if not incentive, some form of strategy provided in the budget that would address this issue of food security in TNT. You see, we could provide incentives. We could say, okay, well, we're going to cut VAT on remember during the pandemic or in the latter stages of the pandemic, they would have removed VAT on several food items, making certain food items VAT zero rated. They could have said, okay, well, we're going to continue along that stream. They could have even said, well, we will meet with the distributors and try to work out something with them to reduce their prices. None of that was done. But at the end of the day, all of those are just short-term fixes. And short-term fixes, in my view, that's not a real solution. You have to get to the root cause of the problem, which is the fact that we are not we're not producing an adequate amount of food items in this country on an annual basis. Our agricultural sector still continues to underperform despite these increased allocations to the sector. In the first quarter of last year compared to the first quarter of this year, the agriculture sector declined by almost 18%. That is a substantial decline. And a part of the reason for that decline would be some of the factors that I would have spoken about earlier, especially the land tenure issue and getting access to the grants and incentives and programs provided by the Ministry of Agriculture. The fact that they urgently need to implement a smart technology program emanating out of the ministry as well. That has to be the solution. You need to get to the root cause of the problem, which is essentially food production. And it's not rocket science. You want greater food production, you need to incentivize more farming activities, and you need to upgrade your farming strategies. That is my view on. I'm not I don't practice agriculture. I'm not a farmer, but I do understand some of the economics behind the agricultural sector, and I think that is essentially where we need to start. Target the root cause of the problem, no pun intended, and that is going to drive our food production to a massive extent within the space, and it's not going to take long, within the space of about 2 years' time. But the sector needs an entire overhaul. We also have to look at how monies are disbursed within the ministry itself, and not just the Ministry of Agriculture, all ministries, as a matter of fact. I'm seeing hundreds of millions of dollars being spent every year on administrative services. What you need to spend so much money on administrative services for, right? When those same monies could be trickled down to the man on the streets, to the private sector, etc., which is where it really ought to go. I just want to touch on something that MP Parry was just speaking about as well, with respect to manufacturing and issues that are important with customs. The manufacturing sector has performed beautifully, not because of any strategy of the state, but what really assisted them. One of the things that assisted them would have been the extra forex allocation to the Exim Bank of that $100 million. You see, during the just after countries started to open their economy, remember they were locked down, they reopened their economy. So when people weren't spending for such a long time, they wanted to make up for that spending, so they just unleashed a surge of spending internationally, which is what started all these supply chain issues and higher prices, etc. But because of the increased demand internationally, especially out of the United States, our manufacturing sector took good advantage of it. They were able to ramp up their production, but also with the assistance of the Exim Bank. Because remember, much of their raw materials, the equipment, the technology they utilize on a daily basis are imported. And of course, to import, you need your US dollars. So that's where the Exim Bank came in handy. The prices of these inputs then would have been higher because of the supply chain issues, but they got some relief because of the Exim Bank. So they were able to speed up the rate at which they were to produce, and of course build up their exports more. They got a greater market share within the US, so their export levels increased. They were able to bring in more foreign exchange, but in addition, some were able to reduce their reliance on the Exim Bank's forex facility because their exports increased. They didn't have to go back to the Exim Bank. They could have utilized their own stocks of foreign exchange without having to go to the Exim Bank or go much to commercial banks. Now, it must remembered, facilities like the Exim Bank are there to supplement what the commercial banks do, not replace the activities of the commercial banks. Now, that actually brings me to a particular issue that I would have noticed with respect to this recent foreign exchange problem that we had. Remember, we would have seen recently that the commercial banks, one commercial bank in particular would have reduced their forex allocation via the credit card from $10,000 to $5,000, really because of a one-off event. The VAT refunds that would have been provided to the multinationals, particularly the energy companies, that gave them a reason to not have to exchange whatever US revenues they had for TT dollars, because they got TT dollars via the VAT refunds. However, what we have to realize is that the commercial banks, the authorized dealers, then they purchase foreign exchange from the central bank and from companies like the multinationals who earn their revenues in US dollars and need to convert it to TT dollars in order to engage in their operations locally. So that's where the commercial banks primarily get their US dollar injections from. However, over 2020 to 2022, the commercial banks, the authorized dealers, had a surplus of about $725.8 million US dollars, which meant that they bought more foreign exchange than what they sold. So they had an excess of foreign exchange over that 3-year period. However, for the first 8 months of this year, up till the end of August, according to the central bank data, they actually had an overall deficit of about 346 million US dollars. So meaning that they sold 346 million US more than what they would have purchased. So that meant overall they should still have an excess of 379.8 million US. So let me repeat that. The commercial banks should have, by the end of August, an excess of 379.8 million US dollars. So that, I find this curious. If you had an excess amount of US, what was the need to drop the credit card allocation? And further to this, the minister would have directed the central bank to increase the foreign exchange allocation on a one-off basis by about 50 million US dollars. So there was an additional 50 million US injected into the banking sector. So if you have this extra US coming in, why have you not bumped back up the credit card allocation from 5,000 US to 10,000 US? I find this all rather curious. So I hope there can be some form of clarification going forward. In the budget, however, one of the other things linked to what the MP was speaking about just now, they spoke about the digitization, the digital economy. And we've had the single electronic window since the days of Patrick Manning when he was the Prime Minister, right? This would have been provided from some capital given to us by or loaned to us by the Inter-American Development Bank. We, like other Caribbean countries like Jamaica, got this excellent revolutionary online system where theoretically you can do all your transactions with the state and all state agencies using the single electronic window. Jamaica is fully online. Any transaction you want to do with the state, you want to pay your customs duties, your VAT, whatever port charges, rent and demurrage, etc. You can do all of this using this single electronic window since 2018. You can pay all your taxes using their single electronic window since 2018. In Zambia, in Africa, which is a country far less developed than us. You could have done that since 2016. So I beg to ask, what does he keep back here? We've seen now in this budget, they announced that you can pay, you can make your payments digitally with the Ministry of Agriculture, I think Ministry of Roads and Transport, and there's one other, the Ministry of Health. So why not customs and the port just yet? Why is it at this stage in 2023, even though the technology still exists, you still have, as an importer, you still have to go to the port if your duties and charges are less than $5,000 and pay them in cash. And if they're greater than $5,000, you have to go and get a manager's check in a bank. So in this day and age, you have to waste all that time to clear your goods. And when you're trying to clear your goods at the port, there are delays, excessive delays. Many times the one scanner they have in the port of Spain, there are several instances where it may not work. That delays customs. So you end up having to pay customs overtime charges. Point Lisas has no scanners at this stage. However, the minister did indicate that they have secured 4 new scanners on a budget of about $90 million $90 million. So we look forward to that, because that, if used effectively, can help to alleviate some of these issues where it takes too long to clear your goods at the port. It could theoretically help to reduce the extent to which businesses have to pay these customs overtime charges, and of course reduce the security issues at the port as well. We've seen recently where several bonded warehouses, because of some form of illegal activity, had to close down. But they didn't have to close down. In other countries, more advanced countries in the US, if you have an illegal activity, they deal with it, but they're not closing down the port or the bonded warehouse. Importers could still go and clear their goods, but here they closed them down. So importers had to go to other warehouses, other ports, other bonds, etc., to clear their lawful cargo, which meant greater customs overtime charges and even charges for overtime bond warehouse, right? But bonded warehouse overtime charges. So, of course, all of this drives up the cost of doing business. And I would dare say the 4 scanners, while it's certainly most welcome, and I applaud the minister for taking that step, even though it should have been done since last year. I remember in last year's budget, their developmental expenditure program, there was $90 million already allocated for scanners. But anyway, there's that figure is actually $100 million if you get into the books. So it's gone up by $10 million. However, it's certainly welcome that we're getting those 4 scanners and the 14 other portable ones. But I think we've gotten to a stage where even the bonded warehouses, all of them, require scanners to speed up the rate at which items are cleared and items are inspected and cleared, and certainly, as equally as important, reduce the level of criminal activities coming in, criminal actions coming into the country, importations of illegal weapons, narcotics, etc., by having scanners in all these points of entry, including the bonded warehouses.
Thank you. Dr. B. Israel, given the Chief Secretary Farley Augustine's concern about Caribbean airline services between Trinidad and Tobago and the recent budget allocation, do you think the measures outlined in the budget will effectively address the ongoing connectivity issues between the 2 islands? And how can CAL's expansion plan align with these efforts to provide reliable and efficient service?
This is a sore point for us. It's important to note that even though the rest of the world has opened up post-COVID, the reality is that Tobago still has not actually opened up, even though we are several years beyond what is happening elsewhere. What do I mean by that? Before COVID, the Caribbean Airlines had a total of 24 or so flights going back and forth between Trinidad and Tobago. Since COVID, that has actually been reduced to 12. So when we opened back up, it went up to 12, and it is still at that point of 12 at this point. We hear all of the argument about the subsidies and the fact that Caribbean Airlines is not making money on the inter-island transportation route, which we find pretty curious, because the fact is that the country is called Trinidad and Tobago, and one of the tenets of the Constitution is freedom of movement. and therefore it is part of the government's responsibility to ensure that we have the infrastructure that allows for freedom of movement. And the same way where we do not think as PTSC, for example, as a profit-making entity, we should consider the fact that the travel between Trinidad and Tobago should not be seen as a profit-making entity, because it really is necessary to allow travel between Trinidad and Tobago. Outside of the government sector, tourism is the other economic driver of the island of Tobago, which means that we literally need people to get to the island. And unless they can fly on their own or they can swim, it means we need to get the actual boats and planes landing in Tobago. The Minister of Finance actually did not say anything when he spoke about the entire plan of CAL's expansion. It actually did not include anything that would improve the inter-island transportation between Trinidad and Tobago, because CAL has been very clearly indicating to Trinidad and Tobago and to the rest of the world that they are ready to take up the slack that, for example, Liat had going to the various islands in the Caribbean, and they have actively not done anything to improve the connectiveness between Trinidad and Tobago, which is why the Tobago House of Assembly last week in our Assembly legislature, we actually went to the what we would call it's the House in Tobago, the equivalent to the Parliament in Trinidad. We actually went to the House to debate a motion that would allow the Tobago House of Assembly to create, in essence, a transportation company that would then allow us, it would be a special purpose company that would then allow us to start really exploring all of the other opportunities for travel to Tobago. So, for example, we have Carnival coming up at the end of August, and when the Minister for Tobago West was asked about it, the MP for Tobago West was asked about it, she indicated that she had spoken to the Minister of Finance, who is directly responsible for Caribbean Airlines being the state company on the Ministry of Finance. And he had indicated that he will think about it and will give a response in a month or so. October Carnival was announced since last year, at the end of October Carnival last year. And therefore we knew that it was coming again this year. We knew to be excited about it. We launched it. We did all of that. So for the Minister of Finance to say to the MP for Tobago West, give me a month to even think about whether we will have increased flights coming to Tobago for Carnival, was again an absolute insult. We have a situation where there are band leaders telling us that individuals are continually coming to them indicating that they want to play mass in Tobago for Tobago Carnival. They want to buy their packages, but when they look on the Caribbean Airlines website, they are not seeing flights to get to Tobago. There are people calling from New York and from Miami and so forth, indicating they want to come for Tobago Carnival, but they are literally not seeing flights to get them to Tobago. And even if they have a flight, even through Caribbean Airlines, that would get them to Trinidad, they are not getting the flight to get to Tobago. Their aim is not to come to Trinidad for Tobago Carnival, it is to come to Tobago for Tobago Carnival. So we now have a perfect opportunity where the Tobago House of Assembly has created an avenue for immense economic activity on the island, and the only thing we need is a little help getting people to the island, and that seems to be a significant challenge. So we went ahead and we passed that bill, that motion to create the Tobago Transportation Company, or whatever we would call it. And you will actually hear coming out of that us seriously brainstorming and thinking through probably partnering with other private entities outside of Caribbean Airlines, outside of Port Authority, to figure out how we can get people directly to Tobago, whether it's by boat or by plane, because that is what we need to do to bring people to the island. We understand that this seems to be a challenge that we need to figure out on our own. So we have taken up the responsibility of doing that on our own to see where it goes. I have no faith, pun intended, in the measures that were identified by the Minister of Finance as it relates to Caribbean Airlines, and whether that would really influence what happens in Tobago positively, because they've had the opportunity to do it and they've clearly decided that they are not doing it.
Thank you, Dr. B. Israel. MP Parry, with the additional allocation of $18 million for new police vehicles and equipment in 2024, there's an ongoing trend of increased investment in law enforcement. However, we have not seen any corresponding decrease in our crime statistics. How can we ensure that this investment provides better value for money and leads to a tangible improvements in public safety?
Now, I have a view. The issue with crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago cannot be addressed, as I mentioned before, with only laws, with technology and throwing money at it. If we don't fix the operators of the criminal and judicial system, we will get nowhere. There are players, there are operators that have a role from intelligence gathering to evidence processing to prosecution to the prison system. And if we don't fix the operators, then we are not going to fix anything. So for instance, $80 million in vehicles, does that improve the trust of the public to the TTPS? Putting 1,000 recruits, and I can tell you, we had an experience with that, something called SRP 2000 many years ago under Prime Minister Manning. And it was an opportunity for every crook and criminal who have an intent to get into the TTPS did it during that period. And we are reaping the benefits of that mishandling of SRP 2000 many years ago. And I suspect we're going to do the same thing again. Putting 1,000 more police officers on the ground, does that improve the trust of the people to the TTPS? It doesn't. If we have to raise the trust level of the primary operator, which is the TTPS, we must answer some simple questions. How do we address 590 police officers who are before the courts today on various charges, but they're getting their pay and they're walking outside running taxi and maxi and so on? So they are burden on the state. There is no swift justice for police officers, so they can get away with anything, and that causes mistrust. We have a high absenteeism in the TTPS. I can tell you sometimes when I reach out to the superintendent of the division of which I am a part of in Eastern there, they would tell me that, look, a shift needs 10 police officers on a Saturday night. 3 men turn up, all 7 of them get sick. Now you tell me all 7 police officers get sick on a Saturday night. Now something is wrong with that. How are we addressing those issues? We spend $80 million in overtime for the TTPS every year. How many additional patrols are we getting? Have we seen a comparative improvement or reduction in certain types of crimes because of this $80 million in overtime? So if we don't address the operators, we talk about forensics, right? In 2016, there was a promise of an $80 million Chinese loan to build a new forensic science center in Trinidad and Tobago. As of today, all that has been done is a 40-foot container put on a piece of block somewhere, and they put in evidence inside of it for storage for nobody not to thief it. So for 2-foot rat and thing not to come and take it and go away with it. We have not addressed forensics. The criminal justice system, if we don't have swift justice, then these are the things that really causes the improvement in terms of seeing a reduction in crime and criminality. So, you know, I cannot see either of these two measures making any kind of dent. Yes, we want more vehicles. Yes, we need more vehicles. We need to have a higher presence of patrols. I would leave Parliament till 11 o'clock on a Friday night sometimes, and I will drive to Mayor and I will see 1 police vehicle. 1. Now something is wrong with that. You have our business centers which are highly active on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we have our avenues and so on. Why are we not seeing more uniformed officers between the hours of 6 and 10? Why are we not seeing more patrols in the night between 12 and 5 when the guns and the drugs are running? Now, these are questions that the operators must understand or must answer at the end of the day. So unless we don't get to the root cause of those things, and I mean, we're talking agriculture, we talk root, we talk faith, we talk, all the other things. But at the end of the day, we must address that. We must address those things. So I don't see, unless we fix E999 to come back to a 5-minute response as it was under the Pandey administration, we have a problem. We must dispatch E99 from the district, not from Port of Spain. Because I can tell you, when you tell a man I live in at Gould Street, Mayaro, the third house, the officers don't know where that location is, because in the United States, you can say house number 125, corner X Street, Y Street. How we give address in this country is round the corner by the mango tree in front of the red sand heap. And after 2 rainy seasons, the red sand wash away, and then the address gone. So again, we have to address the operators, the operations of these things. And I think when we start to do that, we will start to deal with the issue of crime and criminality in this country. Other than that, it are people making money, selling ankle bracelet, selling transportation to put more people in prisons, to put more technology inside it, more man to make money on the side somewhere, and we're not addressing the operators of the system. So I wait with bated breath to see how this new initiative of putting 1,000 more officers on the ground and $80 million worth of vehicles, if that is going to improve our conditions over the next 12 months, which I doubt that is going to happen.
Thank you, MP Parry. Dr. Arjun, what are your thoughts on the proposed increased rate in retirement age from 60 to 65 years in the national insurance system? Do you believe this change is a sustainable solution, or is it merely moving the goalposts without exploring more effective strategies to ensure the fund's long-term stability?
No, this is something I've been calling for a while, since last year. I think this is a good move by the state. It's a bold move, but a good move as well. Other countries, other more advanced economies, and let me just say this: we keep referring to the U.S., referring to Europe, countries in Europe, Singapore, etc., as the benchmark, then, as where we ought to be. Right. Well, that is also where we ought to be. That is also one of the standards that they use in terms of their retirement age. In many advanced economies, is 65, and in countries like the UK, for example, you can keep working even after you're 65 years old. So, we can't conveniently use comparisons for these countries when it suits us, and not look at other things when we're not pleased with what we get. However, that being said, the National Insurance Fund is in dire straits. The rate of inflow, the inflows into the funds in terms of the contributions being made, are by far being outweighed by the benefits that they have to pay every year. In fact, that gap, that shortage, is increasing. I mean, we've seen it crossed well over $1 billion in the last year. And why is this? It's not just because people are living longer. Of course, people are living longer means that the more NIS benefit payouts have to be made. But remember, NIS they pay a sickness benefit as well. They also pay maternity benefits. They pay a funeral grant. They pay the spouse benefit after an individual passes away. So it's a number of outflows then from the fund. When the NIB have to tap into their investment income, because the contributions being made to the fund when you're working, it's not just put in a bank sitting there. They take that money and they invest it in the local capital market, the local real estate market as well, and they also invest up to 25% of it, according to the law, in the international capital markets. Recently, however, we would have seen the fund's value, the investment side of things, taking a hit, given that interest rates internationally would have increased. And when interest rates increase, the value of the bond investments tend to fall. However, some of the investment income could in the future be used to invest in new bond issues to take advantage of the high interest rates at cheaper prices. However, putting the complexities of the financial side, the financial elements aside, increasing the retirement age is going to allow for far greater contributions to come into the fund, right? That is one of the key variables, if not the key variable, to save this fund. Because those in uproar over increasing the retirement age, I mean, how are they going to feel if you retire and you have no NIB benefits to get, right? So is one or the other. And there are other benefits increasing the retirement age also. The fact that you're working 5 years longer, right, for those who will get to whenever they set it and get to that 65-year mark, it means that, one, the productivity of the economy is going to improve, because these are persons that are well experienced in their jobs and they're therefore working longer. So it helps you the productivity of the economy. The second thing is that the firm does not have to spend money on recruiting new workers when those workers retire. They don't have to spend money, because it can be costly to train individuals that are now coming into the organization. So they save money on that. And also, I do appreciate certainly that it can affect the labor market. It makes the labor market more competitive, because when persons are working longer, there are less vacancies available. So those coming out of high school and coming out of university that are looking for jobs, there are less vacancies, unless, however, we stick and implement a proper diversification strategy in the country that is going to build the non-energy sectors further and create more positions for people, recent graduates, etc., to fall in. That is what is needed. However, and in addition, another benefit is that when people are working longer, they can contribute more to their private pension fund once they have one, and also save more and invest more, so they can have a better nest egg for when they retire. They could save more and invest into some property, rent it out, etc., for when they retire, to get a retirement income post 65. Now, what I don't get the impression from the minister that this is going to happen overnight. In fact, what I believe it may happen, and what ought to happen, is that you increase the retirement age in a stepwise manner. So if you're 59 and you know you want to retire at age 60, but they come and tell you, well, no, we're increasing the retirement age, you should allow those people at age 59 to still retire when they hit 60, or give them the option to continue working. The stepwise manner, for the first 2 years, you increase the retirement age from 60 to 61. 2 years later, or even a year later, they can increase it from 61 to 62, and then 62 to 63 2 years later, and so on. So over the space of a decade, they move from 60 to 65. So that way is not going to present an overnight shock to the labor market, where many people will be, many university graduates or people looking for jobs will find it more difficult to get jobs. And it's not going to be a serious burden to those individuals who were hoping to retire at age 60. They have 1 or 2 more years left to go. And then all of a sudden you hear overnight, well, no, we have to work an extra 5-6 years, depending on whatever age they may be. Remember, a lot of people at age 50, at 59 already have chronic diseases. They're on CDAP medication. To ask some of them to work from just overnight from 60 to 65 is not a reasonable thing to do. So it has to be a stepwise manner.
Thank you, Dr. Arjun. You know, we're having a lot of fun, and I see we're almost running out of time, and I know that MP Parry has to leave us in a little bit as well.
Yeah, Chris, let me just add one thing quickly to what Dr. Arjun says. Yeah, in terms of the retirement, I think this sticking point that we're at right now is that we understand, I think the unions are pressing against this, is that somehow in the conversation, and I think I heard, Minister Manning bring this up, that there may be a penalty in terms of your retirement money if you were to take an early option within the 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. I think that's one of the sticking points. And I know from the opposition benches, I think the position of, it should really be a voluntary decision whether you choose to work beyond 60. It should not be that phase basis. Okay, that's fine. But if you choose to go home at 60, I think that should be your option. I think that's the position that I heard even the political leaders speak about today. But I think the sticking point with that really is there's some sort of penalty. You lose some money if you wish to go at 60. So, and I think that is what the unions are a bit up in arms about right now. But I know conversations are still happening around that going forward.
MP, while you have the floor, I want to pose this question to you, and it relates to our energy sector. We heard a lot of thumping of the desk. I know you were sitting opposite across the floor. We heard a lot of thumping of the desk for the Dragon Gas deal, which we have been hearing about that and still at the conversation stage since 2013. We even looked at the Manatee project, and now we're hearing that we were supposed to be on stream for 24, and we're hearing we'll be on stream in 2028. Interestingly also, Curtis James, he put out an article, I believe, early in September, and he said that we don't even pass one of the environmental approvals, our certificate of environmental clearance. We don't even have that as yet. So my question is, considering the significant developments in the energy sector, according to Minister Imbert, and he said he spoke of the Dragon Gas field agreement with Venezuela. He said the advancement in renewable energy projects. Do you really believe that these measures proposed in the budget would support sustainability and growth in our energy sector?
Well, I can tell you this, that we need gas. Gas coming from a truck, a plane, a pipeline from the sky, it will be welcomed. The challenge that we are finding is that the Dragon Gas issue has been clouded in secrecy. Just about 2 weeks ago, there was an announcement that some other agreement has been signed. But there are two questions on the Dragon Gas that nobody is responding to. One, what are we paying the Venezuelan government for the gas? Because the United States office, the OFLAC office, have said that you can't pay cash, can't pay US currency. So what are we going to be paying the Maduro administration for the gas? That's the first question. I don't think that has been answered in any detail. And two, there has been two reports from the Venezuelan media and one in the international media that the Dragon Gas will be processed in Trinidad and Tobago for re-export somewhere else. In the international media, there has been talks between European companies, the United States government, to take that Dragon Gas from Venezuela. So the question that I have on that issue is that 350 million standard cubic feet of gas that we ought to be getting from Dragon Gas, it has been pronounced by the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Energy over the last 2 years that it is going to help with our current 2.5 billion standard cubic feet shortfall in the Point Lisas industrial estate. But if, according to the Venezuelan media and the international media, that this gas is to be processed in Trinidad for re-export, not used in the Point Lisas estate, then that is not going to help us. The second issue about the Manatee. The Loran Manatee is the biggest field that we have in our future, providing we could get to it. Right now, Shell has not confirmed anything on that. There has been no confirmation by Shell on the Manatee leg of that. There has been some agreement signed, but as far as I know, and I think Curtis Williams wrote about that as well, that Shell has not signed off fully on that project as well. Now, that is another big amount of gas. Now, we do have some gas coming. There's a number, about 3 or 4 pockets of gas that's coming in from Touchstone, from EOG. We have a big pocket of gas sitting northeast of Tobago, I think, which Dr. B. Israel might be aware of in terms of that Calypso field. But that too is still not sanctioned. There is no agreement. And if you understand how these gas operations work, the window of delivery is 4 to 5 years, 6 years in some cases. So even if tomorrow morning, Dr. Rowley and Stewart signs off with Woodside, I believe is the operator there, it is going to take 6 years before that gas comes into any sort of pipeline in Trinidad and Tobago. So my position has always been, when all these supplemental taxes and all these bricks that are coming, I still feel that we are not doing enough in terms of our deep water exploration. The incentives, we are way behind. I can tell you this, there are New Horizon fields where the agreement between those governments and the operators is between 35 and 40% royalties. I understand our deal is still 65%. So when these boards sit to decide where I'm going to spend my investment money, and you have New Horizon fields that, they will pay out 35 and 40% while we are asking for 60%. It is not a good incentive. The minister in his budget speech, he demonized capital accelerated depreciation that was done by the last government in terms, and he says that we gave away, that the People's Partnership gave away the energy sector. But listen, that caused energy companies to explore, and that is what gave us the gas in 2017, 2018, that they beat it and thumped it their chest about, right? So they demonized the procedure, but they beat the chest when they got the gas. And look, now they're going to do the same thing. They are considering to look at new capital accelerated depreciation as part of the policy. So we're not doing enough in terms of the deepwater exploration. We need to do more. We need to get more gas. And then on the other side of that, we have to figure out a way to stop being a one-trick pony. We are a one-trick pony up to today. There is no new sources of foreign direct investment. As much as non-manufacturing is doing well, foreign direct investment throws US currency inside the coffers of the bank to make small business access it. You can get foreign currency to continue a particular lifestyle that we've grown accustomed to in this country. But there was nothing in the budget, there was nothing in the future to move Trinidad and Tobago from this one-trick pony. The only thing that I heard the minister talk about, which is something that is not going to be state-driven, I know it's private sector-driven, it is the green hydrogen plant that HDF is proposing to build here at a cost of $250 million US dollars, which has, I think, a time frame of 2029. Green hydrogen is important. It's good for the methanol projects that we want to do with green methanol for the new ships that are coming. We want to do bunkering of green methanol and so on. All those things are going to bring in good currency for us. But again, this government has a problem with delivery and implementation. So they are great plans. I can tell you when we go into government in 2025, those are the type of plans that we will continue, we will robustly pursue it to make sure those things become the new driver of revenue for Trinidad and Tobago going into the new government in 25.
We'd like to now go to our closing statements now. Let's start with Dr. Faith. Dr. Faith, we tried to explore, and I want to thank the panel as well. We tried our best to try to touch as much as we could in this hour and a few minutes. Dr. Faith, what are some of your closing statements in about 1 to 2 minutes? Give us your closing statements.
Certainly. I want to thank you for inviting me to come on this program to help the national population get a better understanding of the perspective of the average Tobagonian, and particularly the Tobago House of Assembly. What does that mean? It means that we have been a part of this union known as Trinidad and Tobago for so many years. The union started on a very rocky place, but we now have an opportunity to make this union an equitable one. What does that mean? That means finally providing for the people of Tobago an opportunity to develop on par with our brothers and sisters in Trinidad. To do that, you need the kind of capital development that will get the types of industries on the island to allow those of us who live on the island the ability to really self-actualize. And to do that, we definitely need a greater share of the pie that has been spent on this country known as Trinidad and Tobago. By no means are we indicating that we want all of it, but we really want the opportunity to truly stand side by side with our brothers and sisters in Trinidad, and that would ensure that this country known as Trinidad and Tobago continues to grow strong. That is all that we are fighting for, and we are asking each of you to be a part of that process with us.
Thank you, Dr. B. Israel. I want to go to Dr. Arjun. Closing statements.
Sure. Amidst all of the buzz surrounding the dragon gas, and I think whatever progress the municipality has made in the negotiation stages, we saw in the mainstream media that they signed a profit sharing arrangement. Whatever progress has been made, I think kudos to him and the authorities. It must be remembered, however, that the gas from the Dragon field should only be seen as a way to supplement our production levels. We don't know when we're going to be able to monetize this gas. It may come within 2 to 3 years' time, but we are told that could bring about a maximum of about 350 million standard cubic feet of gas per day. Where are we right now? We're at 2.5. If you add this, you get to 2.85. That is still far less than the 3.5 billion standard cubic feet we need per day to meet our local needs for the three remaining trains at Atlantic LNG, the petrochemical sector in Point Lisas, and TNTech for our electricity generation. So I agree with MP Parry. Any opportunities we get to monetize gas, not just from Dragonfield. Dragonfield has three other fields. It has I think Rio Caribe. It also has Mejillones and one more field. The name escapes me right now, but if we have the Hibiscus pipeline, the NGC putting a new pipeline from the Dragonfield to Hibiscus, we can capitalize on the existing infrastructure. We'll need more investments for infrastructure, but what is to stop us if this deal goes successfully to monetize even additional amounts of gas from them? The focus, however, ought to be more on deep water exploration. Remember, deep water, when we compare, we recently had about 3 deep water blocks being awarded a few days ago. I think it was last week, to Shell BP Consortium. That's an important progress, and this is not to detract from that at all. But this is 3 blocks awarded out of 17 blocks that were up for bidding. When you compare that to a decade ago in 2012, when there were 12 bids for only 5 blocks, it shows you that the investment environment for deepwater exploration has drastically changed. We are competing for capital from these energy companies, capital that they could use to send to a shallow water jurisdiction, another country with shallow water reserves, where they could therefore benefit from lower costs and economies of scale. We are competing for capital that they could use to invest in renewable energy instead. Banks have increased their interest rates internationally, so the cost of getting capital for these energy companies is very high. Therefore, you want to have a proper fiscal plan, a proper fiscal strategy that is going to give them an attractive rate of return that they're looking for, to be able to ramp up the rate at which they engage in this deep water exploration and development activities. That ought to be a main focus going forward, especially with accelerating our bid water, our deep water bid rounds.
MP Parry, closing statements.
But again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share stage with Dr. Israel and Dr. Arjun. I think, at the end of the day, our job in the parliament as an opposition party is not to rubber stamp anything that the government brings before us. Our job is to scrutinize it. It is to punch holes, and wherever there are leaks, we give the government an opportunity to fix it. If they choose not to fix it, well, we have to go on like that. I do believe that Trinidad and Tobago has a bright future. We do have the capacity to make the kind of change that we ought to make in terms to take us forward. Dr. Israel, I just want to tell you, I think Tobago is the biggest and the best investment that Trinidad can ever make. And from a businessman, from a business standpoint, we talk about energy being our one-trick pony. There is a pony sitting there, and it's just untouched. And I think a bigger focus on Tobago in terms of how do we drive that tourism sector, that art, music, and culture. I think that has positive GDP for us at the end of the day. So as we go on in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, we will continue to lobby for what we believe in terms of our philosophy at the United National Congress to drive positive changes for Trinidad and Tobago. And we look forward to working with everybody, with all the partners. We look forward to working with Dr. Arjun, Dr. Israel, as we go forward as a political entity in terms of finding the solutions to take all of us forward at the end of the day. So thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure having this conversation with all of you this evening. Thank you.
Now, guys, this has been critical conversations, and we have reflected on the Minister of Finance fiscal package for budget 2024. Of course, according to the standing orders of the House of Representatives, the opposition leader would be responding. Well, she has 4 days to respond, and so tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. she would give her response to the Minister of Finance budget statement. Now, we will also be diving into her response next week. So I just want to thank the panelists again. The 2024 budget is complex. There are a lot of implications that will affect each and every one of us. And I think we have gained valuable insights today, and we really want to thank our panelists, not so?
Absolutely, Chris. The national budget affects us all, and understanding it is key to informed decision making. We hope today's discussion has shed some light on these crucial matters.
Before we sign off, we want to thank you, our viewers, for joining us in this critical conversation. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged. This is Critical Conversations. Good night.
Good night.